Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your coffee. Everybody's made the huge distance from their living room back to their desk. So now we're into session 4, which is focused on enabling factors for individual learning accounts. It'll be similar format to the previous session as well. Speakers will give a short presentation and we'll have an opportunity for some quick questions after that. And then when we have heard from all the panelists, then we will go into a more open discussion as well with your Slido contributions. So please send those questions, and just a reminder, if you want to ask a specific person, please put their name in the question or in the comment as well, and we're pleased to take that. We also have an overarching question for this section as well, and the question this time: what are the most important enabling factors for the success of an ILO? What are the most important enabling factors for the success of an ILO? So please don't wait till the end to put your comments and your remarks on the Slido in response to that question. Our team will collate those into an aggregate summary, and we'll bring those to you a little bit later on as well. Now to our first speaker in this session, Pedro Moreno da Fonseca. He is the Skills and Lifelong Learning Specialist at Skills Branch ILO HQ. Good morning, Pedro.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. On behalf of the ILO, I would like to thank the opportunity to participate in this very important discussion. This is, of course, an issue which is dear to the ILO, since lifelong access to skilling and opportunities to learn is fundamental for people to also access opportunities to have decent work and to establish stable careers all through their lives. It is a particular concern at this time, given the current situation, which was provoked by the COVID pandemic, as we all know, and the needs that people have to skill and reskill and move jobs. We have particular concerns also with the low and medium income countries, although all that I'm going to say is applicable to all contexts. But we have concerns with, for example, how people in large, in countries with large informal economies are going to access any type of entitlement which is developed, or, for example, how less literate people are also going to have interest and know about these schemes and access them, a bit in line with what Mr. Bastavel has focused in. In the ILO, the ILO upholds the right to, let's say, the existence of career guidance through Convention 142. And in recent times, the ILO has also done a review of lifelong learning entitlements jointly with UNESCO, which was published in 2009, which shown that even in schemes which are only partially implemented, there is provision of guidance. So the big question here is if guidance is actually doing everything which it can do to, let's say, to provide the right support and to fulfill its role. One important aspect, as it has been focused, is how are the schemes, how can the schemes address the needs of the most vulnerable beneficiaries? Historically, ILAs have been more accessed by people with higher skills and with higher literacy levels, but nevertheless, the ones who can probably benefit the most from these schemes are low skilled, they have low literacy levels, and we know, and there is surmounting evidence, both in Europe and in the rest of the world, that the ones who need it the most frequently don't know about these solutions. They also don't know about vocational education and training. They also don't know about work-based learning solutions. And so they require knowledge to be able to access it. Also, many people may require much more than information. They may require psychological support. They may require health support. So when we think about the support, we need to think about it in an holistic way. Also, we need to take into account that many of the potential beneficiaries will be out of range of standard services, employment services, even standard social security services. So then there needs to be an approach to deal with these situations. Recently, we have implemented a pandemic with 6 other international organizations, many of which are represented here, such as the OECD, UNESCO, and CEDEFOP. And it illustrated clearly that there is this pattern of vulnerability that needs to be addressed. So we saw that there was a rise in digital and distance support in terms of guidance to individuals. But we also saw that a lot of the most vulnerable groups were not covered because they lacked digital equipment, they lacked internet connections. So digital was not a miracle solution, was not the silver bullet. And also in many other cases, people actually didn't know which services to address because they essentially had no entitlements or didn't know if they had entitlements to any type of support. The only case in which we saw that there was more or less a consistent support was for the unemployed who had some sort of provision through the employment services. Also, youth transitioning into the labor market and with some also sometimes with some relevant experience was largely unsupported. When I think about the roles of guidance, guidance has a double role. One is the increase of social outcomes. So as it has been discussed, one of the strong roles which guidance can have in the ILAs is to inform about the scheme itself, that it exists and what it consists of. So to raise access so that people know that it's there and how they can access it. It also raises awareness about the diverse learning solutions and also validation and recognition of prior learning solutions which exist, which are available to individuals and how they can use them, and also assist them in integrating them. It can help people assess their skills needs so that they can program the way in which they are going to make their learning investments. It can also help people do skills development of core skills ahead of doing the development of technical skills. And it can help people also clarify their choices in terms of careers and learning so that they can ensure long-term impact. There is a set of skills which guidance can help people develop called career management skills, which help people all through their lives manage their learning and their career decisions. And I would suggest that career management skills need to be part of the DNA of any entitlement scheme as much as technical skills need to. Also, on the other hand, guidance can increase the efficacy and efficiency of the schemes. It can help improve labor market awareness of people who want to engage in the schemes so that they can make choices which are personally relevant, but which are also labor market relevant and address skills gaps in the labor market, also therefore providing better careers prospects. Also, the guidance tends to lower the likelihood of disengagement from training, which of course improves the efficiency of the investment of and especially the public investment which is done in these schemes. It also can perform a quality assurance function to the extent that if it is integrated in the scheme, it tends to assure through all the points that I've mentioned before that the investment is well done and well oriented to both individual needs and labor market needs. It also tends to serve more effective coordination between relevant services to the extent that you can develop through guidance processes individual portfolios, which in turn can help develop individual training plans and can also allow for better referrals of individuals across services so that it is always well known who are the individuals, what they need, and what they've done before. How can this be done? Guidance can be integrated as part of the scheme or be in coordination with an existing support. So this is a bit what exists in France, in which there is an entitlement to guidance, and it's very well coordinated with the learning account. You can also use support which is available in validation systems. You can also go more for, let's say, the Nordic option, which you create one-stop shops, which adults can find all types of support combined under one roof. or you can repurpose any other existing services for this effect. Now, digital can be a solution, but you need to bridge the digital gap, and there are more solutions in terms of distance support other than digital. So this needs to be thought about. Also, outreach to vulnerable groups who cannot access normal services needs to be done, needs to be implemented, tends to be a weakness in most national systems. You can also use subcontracting and vouchers, but then you need to assure that when you have private provision, that you have quality assured system services and certified services. Social partner engagement is fundamental to assure that the information provided is relevant and the service is relevant. So essentially, in completing the presentation, we have to pay attention to the profiles of the ones who can benefit the most. We need to mind the gap in terms of coverage when we think about digital and distance solutions. Guidance can both bring social outcomes and increase the efficiency of the system. And there are many, many ways to implement. So we need to find the right formula for the right context. Thank you.
That was great. I'm really struck particularly by what you said about on the lack of support for the young unemployed as well, for young people. And given that we have such a structural unemployment problem, for a youth unemployment problem in Europe as well, how do you think that we should begin to restructure to engage with ILAs for young people?
I think that first of all, I think states need to adhere a bit to a lifelong support logic. I think that things need to start early. They need to start in school. Then you need to have a support which also allows for support during transition to the labor market. And in the labor market, people cannot be left alone. And so, for example, one group which is largely uncovered normally are young people with some work experience who have suddenly become unemployed or and do not know exactly what to do. So to, let's say, reskill and move on with their careers. So for example, this is a niche where normally you need to create something new. So let's say the ILA, as I said, needs to have the career management skills in its DNA. And it needs truly to have a bit of a lifelong support approach behind it, which means that you need to have a policy commitment in this direction. And you probably need to repurpose and to transform a bit the services which exist, paying attention to local capacity. So I would suggest that, for example, investing in regional based services and local based services with the perspective of linking young people to the local labor markets with the cooperation of social partners is an important step to do. And for example, in the Netherlands, you have a good example of how this is done. I mean, there's a lot which can be said about this.
Yeah, how early should we start, though? For example, if we make a comparison with healthcare, health specialists point to the chronic diseases that occur from 55 onwards as well. And they say if you don't start to teach kids from 6 years old about their diet and in a way which they understand, you can't change these problems structurally in society nor culturally. How early do we need to begin the process of speaking about career guidance, structure, and mobility as well? 6 too early?
No, I mean you can start as early as you want, but you just need to have pedagogically appropriate ways to do it. I mean, many countries are advancing towards having career education as a curricular activity. There are several strategies to do this. It can be also an extracurricular activity. You can have activities in which you link children, again, in a pedagogical way with professionals, or have simplified presentations of occupations in work environments. And in a way, it is important that you essentially have a diversified presentation of the range of activities which exist, instead of simply saying to children, you have to be a doctor, a lawyer, or anything else. and that you have the right methods to do so. But you can start very early. For example, in Belgium, where you come from, there are very good examples of how you do this.
Okay, I'm from Ireland, but I live here gracefully. Okay, so just another point on the holistic approach that you mentioned as well. There's a poverty trap there, which is extremely difficult to get out of, especially with people with health conditions. How do you see the capacity for ILAs to find a way to support those who are struggling financially, struggling with healthcare, struggling with family responsibilities as well? Where does this extra capacity and support come from?
Of course, you are now mixing a bit with the issue of financing. I think just very, very quickly on that, I think that you need to think about guidance as an integrating component of the whole lifelong learning exercise. So I don't see why guidance could not be tapped into training funds, for example. You see, and then you have financing of the support through that. But this needs to be thought for each case, each country, and with the participation of social partners. Now, what I also think is that this method needs to be thought through from the perspective of how you support livelihoods, and not only individuals. Of course, we're talking about individual support, but individuals do not exist in a vacuum. They exist in a familiar environment and in the community, and they might play a very important role inside of the family and inside of the community. So you need to have also that in mind.
Excellent, thank you. We have other questions. I want to come back to the digital side of this as well in the discussion later on. Pedro, thank you so much. Let's hear from our next speaker now, which is Brigitte Bouquet. She's the International Expert for Qualifications, General Direction at the France Competence. Good morning, Brigitte. How are you? I can't hear. Can you just check your microphone there for a second? Thank you.
Maybe I think it's better now.
It's perfect now. The floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you. Very, very happy to speak this morning, but I'm quite afraid that what I'm going to say, it will be more back to earth.
Okay, I can't hear you at the moment, Brigitte. Maybe there's a problem with the microphone. Can you just check you haven't gone on mute accidentally?
I think.
There we go. We're back.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, I do. I'll let you know if I can't hear you again. So you just continue, please.
Okay.
Thank
you. I was saying that I'm going to speak of back office, because on the French side, it took us a long time to have a system which can support in an efficient way our compte personnel de formation. So next slide, please, Lucille. Thank you. What I should like to say, what I would like to say to start is that to speak of the scope of the compte personnel de formation, because I saw yesterday that there were many questions about many things, about elements which in France maybe are treated outside the compte personnel de formation. And as I was asked to speak only of this, I would really like to say that we have other measures for guidance, for many other measures. And I will also only focus on the compte personnel de formation and on the French repertories, which are in charge of France Competence. We have in France two repertories, one which is in charge of the National Qualification Framework, and another one which have shorter qualifications. And I will speak of them afterwards. But with let's say the social partners, the government took some official text in order to enable people to use the compte personnel de formation for other elements than the ones which I will speak of later. As you see, we have also, it's for people who are in the who are working people, but we have an exception with some training actions for volunteers, which can be also used via the compte personnel de formation for people who are acting as volunteers. So normally, the compte personnel de formation stops when you go on retirement. But for volunteers, it's something which lasts. So it was just a detail I wanted to add. But most of the actions which are financed by the compte personnel de formation depend on the registration within the two national repertories which France Compétences manages. We include validation of prior learning, what we call in France the kind of validation of prior learning, which is called validation des acquis de l'expérience, which is something which is compulsory to be to the qualifications which are registered in our framework. We have what we call a répertoire spécifique, which has many qualifications, but these qualifications have no level. But there is a social utility for the labor market, and this is discussed by the commission in charge of the Commission nationale de la certification professionnelle, which is in charge of the registration in the two repertories, and there is a discussion about the utility for the labor market of this kind of qualifications, and of course in this commission we have the social partners. We have for funding of CPF, all the qualifications which are registered in the RNCP, which is our répertoire national, which have a level on for the NQF. What is important is that to be registered in our RNCP, the qualifications must be composed by what we call bloc de compétences, block of competencies, and there must be blocks unless the exception for instance some professions which are well is no possibility. But this is important because with the CPF people will be able to finance one of the part of a qualification, which can be very important for them in their working life or to progress. What is important is to say is that the two repertories are based on learning outcomes and not on training courses. But next slide, please, Lucy. What is important is that these learning outcomes, assessed learning outcomes, have an indirect influence on the training courses. And what I would like also to express is that all this construction is a part of a dynamic. Our ministry spoke yesterday of the platform and so on, and of the creation of the compte personnel de formation 7 years ago. And these implied reflection, which were let's say, put in the law, which reformed the VET in 2018, and which created, let's say, a new concept of not a new concept, but a new way to appreciate the quality assurance of the professional certifications, which are registered in the two repertories. So the purpose and the objectives of the new way to see these professionals' qualifications were to make a clarified tool, which was also used and for apprenticeship, for CPF, to be used also to enable new stakeholders to enter this way of thinking and making qualifications. This raised two main questions when we register and when you say you have a professional certification. Do the intended competencies meet the real needs of the labor market? Labor market, or also when we register, we see this in terms of social utility. And do the assessment procedures give a sufficient guarantee that the holder of the qualification really possesses the intended competencies? This means that when we register, we check that the result of the training course is really what is expressed, and it's a kind of re-engineering of the training course during the years in order to really to fulfill these requirements. We will not go into pedagogy, but we will check the coherence. And this is the way that, to use the CPF, we try to make a better quality assurance and a better, let's say, adaptation of the training courses, because we take them by the end and by the assessed competencies. So this constitutes a major opportunity to consider the existing offer, and also to allow the actors which are most involved in the process to have critical analysis of their practice. So for instance, sectors. It was also this necessity to be quality assured, to be really useful for CPF and also for apprenticeships, led us to reduce, to make a better regulation by the Commission for Professional Qualification, la Commission Nationale de la Certification Professionnelle, and to, let's say, we put you the rate of success of the qualifications which are registered in our repertory. Please see the other slide. Thank you. Just to show you how it works. We have two repertories, so RNCP, National Qualification, with levels, répertoire spécifique, and you see we have many criteria to register the qualifications. I don't want to go into detail, but what we want to see, is there is the matching of professional qualifications with social and economic needs, and this is discussed by the Commission of the National Qualification. So maybe we can pass to the next slide, please. So what is useful also for the CPF is the structure of the fiche of the databases we are responsible of. We have two different ways to get the qualification, but the providers must indicate first the organization of prior learning. This is very important because we think that CPF is something which is really can be used for validation of prior learning, and we also have the obligation for the providers of the qualifications, which can be private ones. In France, there is no point to declare the partnership in terms of trading courses. Our system is, let's say, simple. We can have a provider of qualification which is not in France. That will not be the point. We will analyze afterwards the cohorts of the people who have the qualification in France, but you must have training providers, training institutions, and there we will check the quality of the provider because there is a law on quality of VET, and also we will check that let's say that the people who have the qualification are really in the market, in the labor market, where they are supposed to be and have what they were supposed to be after the qualification. So, all this, and the CPF was really useful for this, is really a kind of a quality assurance system in which the repertories are part of. Now also, there must be a dialogue between the awarding bodies and the trainers to really have answer to all the criteria that we see when we register in the qualification framework. And there must be also a quality assurance for each qualification in order to keep the connection with the labor market, the other side. So this is not built like this. In French, we say that Rome was not built in one day. And we have really on the back office a strong IT system in which our repertoire are, let's say, very, very important. You see, we have our system of information of certification professionnelle with the 2 repertories. We hope one of these days to Europass with the QDR, but this is a detail, but we each day, our repertories are sent to the Caisse des Dépôts, which is in charge of, let's say, the financial aspect and the statistics aspect of the CPF. And this is really the most important element of our IT system. And we also have links, and the Caisse des Dépôts has links with what we call ONICEP, which is a public institution which is in charge of listing the training courses. So with these three institutions may have really an in-depth cooperation to compare all the elements which are in the répertoire national, in the répertoire spécifique, and to see if it matches with trainers, because we don't want any kind of trainers to propose training courses which are paid by the CPF. So we are really now engaged in a strong quality assurance démarche to have really a better use of the compte personnel de formation in order to give the applicants, of course, some good products. What I should like to say to end is that, well, IT system is something which is really a basis of the CPF, but we also have some humanity in there, because we have a system of mediator, you see, and these people are in contact with users of CPF, and sometimes when things do not go the right way, there can be introduction of the mediators who tell us, yes, this qualification is not in your register or seems to be outdated and people cannot use them for the CPF. Is there a problem? So you see, there is also for the quality assurance a network of mediators in Pôle Emploi, which is our labor agency, in our own institution, and also in Caisse des Dépôts. And these people talk to us when there are problems. And so we try also to improve every day our system. So I thank you very much for hearing me.
Brigitte, thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation. I really enjoyed to see the clarity of the system and also the social element, which I want to talk more about later. I need to stay on track, so I just want to give you one quick question now, and then I want to bring up some of the elements that you mentioned a little bit later on as well. We had a question from Louise, which has just disappeared off the screen, but she asked, does it take long to get qualifications certified?
How long?
Does it take long? Is it a long process to get a qualification certified?
Well, it depends on it depends on the qualification. If it's a short qualification, for instance, well, I don't know to speak in the. It will depend on the nature of the qualification.
Okay.
If it's, for instance, something which is for the, we have in our system, we have short and long qualifications. So if you take, let's say, a part of a qualification, even a qualification with a level which is in the repertory, it can take you some months, it can take you some days, because we don't. And with validation of prior learning, it can be different. So
Okay.
it's difficult to answer.
I understand. We also have another question to follow up from Bjorn as well. We'll maybe take a look at that a bit later on. Brigitte, thank you. Stay with us for the discussion a little later on as well. But let me introduce our next speaker now as well, Anni Katunen. She's a specialist, senior specialist in education policy and CEO at GlobeEdu. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you.
Great to see you,
from
Anni.
Finland.
Thank you. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Well, what are the enablers of the ILA? I was asked to talk about validation as an enabler because, well, that's one of the things that I've been working on with for more than 20 years in my career. Of course, I'm trying to keep it short and simple in a way, but I'm also going to pose a lot of questions because these are, in a way, it's kind of an unanswered world yet. Well, first of all, obviously, if validation is successful, it potentially shortens the learning time, which leads to the fact that it will save credits for more extensive learning paths aimed at patching the skills gaps. So in a way, that's a very useful tool as such from an economic viewpoint and for both the individual and the society, because it saves resources. So ILA funds can be then, or credits can be then more efficiently used by the individual. And of course, it's good for the society as well. Also to validation as a process, it's a very strong motivator, and it encourages individuals to step back in the world of learning. Of course, if you don't have clients, so to speak, for the ILA, then it doesn't work. We need to have the individuals who are actually willing and able to take advantage of the training that will be provided through the ILA system. And what Pedro was talking about earlier on when he was talking about guidance, and he said that, yes, it is really the sort of low qualified or unemployed people and special target groups that we should be looking at in this system, especially because the highly educated, they are quite familiar with different systems and they can sort of orient themselves inside the systems and find the paths. But it really is the sort of special needs people and people with low qualifications that we need to focus on with ILAs as well. And as we know that, for example, when adult people have dropped out of education early on, for example, secondary education, it's really high threshold for them to enter back into the world of learning. And validation seems to be a very good tool to help these people to get back on track. For example, Iceland has really good numbers on this. They have actually recorded some statistics on how people who have dropped out earlier on in their life, how are they getting on with their education? And 80% of all the people who went through the validation process, they sort of expressed that it is a very empowering process, plus that the guidance included in the validation process was a very big factor for them to staying on the path. So if you have a system of ILAs, I think guidance and validation are both mechanisms and tools that truly enable the system move forward and be effective from both the individual's viewpoint as well as the surrounding society. Of course, validation also provides flexibility and swiftness in terms of access to learning. That's a known factor, and it sort of makes it easier than to access the ILA as well, in a way, if such a system exists. And validation always aims at having an individual approach. So you have your competencies, skills, competencies validated, and then only the skills gaps, in a way, are being looked into. And then we have to tailor training or tailor learning paths. I'm not talking only about training, but I'm talking about learning paths, because learning occurs everywhere. I think here it's quite important to remind people that approximately 80% of all learning in an individual life occurs outside formal education. That's a big number, but if any of us just think about it from our own personal perspective, I think it's quite easy to say that it's the truth. And that's why we can't only talk about formal training, or we shouldn't talk about only formal training and qualification paths when we're talking about taking advantage of ILA systems. Well, validation alone, if we confine it to the world of qualifications only, it's not some sort of a cure-it-all, because the services are so often connected to formal qualification systems, which means that from the individual viewpoint, often the access is restricted or delayed, especially among the target groups, the special target groups that we were talking about. And this, of course, means that we should think about qualification design, that it would be more modular, that allows validation of even smaller units. That would enable many individuals to move forward even better. But that alone doesn't help unless there is a learning outcome-based documentation system of those smaller units. For example, here in Finland, the VET system has been modular, and it's been possible to carry out part qualifications through validation or full qualification through validation for over 20 years. I think 25 years something. But still there are problems because a lot of people have sets of skills that are quite narrow. They're relevant from the viewpoint of working, but they're quite narrow. So they do not fulfill the requirement of a part qualification, but they are part of a part qualification. And it's some institutions have reported that it's quite difficult to, or even impossible in the current system to in a way validate that and then create individual learning paths around those smaller units, even though it would be really beneficial for the individual. And then the second prerequisite that I see is really that non-formal learning providers, whether it's companies that provide training or whether it's like in the Nordic countries, we have a vast network of liberal adult education providers. They should be encouraged and enabled to take up validation procedures in order to make all learning visible. We are seeing quite nice developments in Finland at the moment. In the non-formal sector, they are moving very strongly towards learning outcome-based education and training. But of course, validation as a whole process is still quite far away. But when I'm thinking about individual learning accounts and I'm thinking about non-formal learning providers, whether it's really from the business life side or liberal adult education side or whatever, individuals could really well take advantage of ILAs in the non-formal settings and really target the learning in sort of smaller learning units. It doesn't always have to be a full qualification or even a part qualification, but it could be something smaller to benefit their careers, for example, or their future learning. And here we also have to think about the role of working life in general as a validation and learning provider. This is a big question. And here I'm referring to the fact that it's not only a role as a stakeholder, but a really an active validation provider, like, for example, in the Netherlands. So I'm thinking that it would be really good to have sort of independent validation and guidance centers that sort of enable various paths after validation. Because now validation is often done in connection with formal learning and sort of qualifications, and it doesn't entail all learning that should be made visible. So ILAs could be used in all different learning contexts if we would sort of expand our thinking of where validation should occur. And then the third slide is about micro-credentials, which also refers to in a way to, for example, non-formal learning settings and UBIC learning. As I said, 80% of learning occurs outside of formal education. And I think ILAs would really love micro-credentials because we are learning in small batches every day. When we're sitting in a bus, we are reading articles on our mobile phones or whatever. We're learning all the time and everywhere. But the discussion, for example, about micro-credentials is really scattered. And I think it would be really beneficial to have some sort of a European definition and quality recommendations on micro-credentials. What does it mean? For example, what would be the nominal credit value for one micro-credential be? Is a part qualification a micro-credential, or is it just a part qualification? How can we accumulate micro-credentials that would form cohesive units that can be actually used and benefited from, for example, in working life or in further education? How can micro-credentials be made visible and usable for the individual? So possible answers here are linked to NQFs. In many countries, NQFs are only for formal qualifications, but then it appears that some countries are opening up their NQFs and allowing quite small units to enter as well. Validation, of course, it's about making learning visible. Then do we need a national database for documentation of micro-credentials, for example? We are already building, in many countries, we're building these national databases for formal learning, but not necessarily for micro-credentials. Or should it be all of the above that would make micro-credentials usable? And of course, ILAs would be very good combination to be used with guidance and validation. And I would say that there's a nice symbiosis in this thinking that individual learning accounts could be the enabler of micro-credential accumulation, whereas validation enables individual learning accounts to be used more effectively. So it's, in a way, it's a lovely symbiosis if we look at this. And obviously, we need to think about using artificial intelligence in terms of this as well, because we have a lot of tools, but we need to have the political will and cooperation to start using all the different opportunities that we have. Thank you.
Annie, thank you so much. We just got time for a quick question, then we're going to go to the panel discussion as well. But you talked about the artificial intelligence there as well. I think that's super interesting in the pandemic context as well. Some of these opportunities you talk about, micro credentials, for example. Do you think the sensitivity has changed in terms of what's possible because of the pandemic, because of how we've had to work remotely, because of how we've had to adjust our overall working day as well? Do you think if you had this conversation 2 years ago, there would have been a different interpretation?
Well, I suppose the pandemic has given it a push, but at least in our country, the discussion has started using artificial intelligence in terms of sort of mass validation in a way. It's a horrible word, but because we're talking about individuals, but just to see the big trends, for example, in the labor market and regional trends geographically, sort of pinpointing what is needed there and what already exists, et cetera, and and how can we use validation in order to strengthen that particular market, for example. It has started already, but obviously the pandemic has had a push.
Okay, thank you. Let's bring in our other guests as well, Pedro and Brigitte, and we'll go in a bit more detail on the topics that we were discussing earlier as well. Great to see you all. And Pedro, let's go to some of the questions that we had from Andre Frank, Solidar Foundation. He said, Pedro, you mentioned social partners as having a role in promoting the career guidance options. How can we foresee the civil society organizations to be able to be involved in this process as they could better engage disadvantaged groups in their own community? Pedro.
I mean, there are many ways in which this can happen. I mean, the most obvious, of course, is employers' organizations due to the direct link to the labor market needs. But I think that there's a great diversity of ways. I mean, for example, non-governmental organizations can help a lot in develop outreach to find the people where they are, especially youth groups, long-term unemployed. Also, let's say, find in certain contexts also to help in terms of women activation, and we have examples both inside Europe and in other countries. So this is, for example, a very strong role. The trade unions can also play a very strong role on this level, especially addressing lower skilled workers, and in some cases even helping to upskill migrant workers. So there's a variety of roles which can be played. Okay. It's all about how you organize this and how you finance the whole thing.
Thank you. Brigitte, something in your presentation struck me was the emphasis you put on the social as well as the economic value of this process as well. How do you measure the social value? We talk about economic, we can talk about the future economy and the specific skills to match for the labor market, but the social side, how do you measure this?
Well, we measure this when we register in our qualification frameworks. Because the providers have to prove that what they propose really leads to something which is useful to the labor market, or which, for instance, for languages. French people are not very keen on foreign languages, but this for us is obviously for the Commission. And for the Commission, this is of course a social utility. We have also registered many qualifications in TIES for digital, for instance. So we also work with other institutions. You know, in France, we work on networks. You saw it for IT, but
Okay.
France Compétences, for instance, is working with Pôle Emploi, the labor agency, is working with some institutions which are in charge of foreseeing the labor market and so on. So we use many elements.
Okay.
To
Let me just
social
add to this as well. You also mentioned the role of retirees, people who have moved past the labor market.
Retires is only the CPF normally stops when people retire.
Sure, but what I
But
wanted to ask you specifically was in terms of
these people.
what I want to ask you specifically was in terms of an aging population. You know, if we factor in that our working lives will get progressively longer, you may rejoice or not in that. The ILAs, is there something missing in the discussion that we've had, that we need to look beyond simple working life, and to put this in the context of the social utility as well? Maybe the labour aspect, labour value is not so apparent, but the social element for an ageing population and lifelong learning could be something we have to consider much more deeply.
Maybe, but if we speak of French CPF, it's only for people who work. Let's suppose that if this aging population, like other kind of population, are considered by government and social partners are being a priority, they can have more money in the CPF, because our system enables either state or employees to put more money on some kind of population. We have this for disabled people, of course. But if there is a social decision that these aging population are a priority, they will. Okay.
Thank you. Annie, I just want to bring Annie back in again on the micro-credentials as well. It seems to me micro-credentials are an easy access point for those who have been outside the formal education system for some time, for those perhaps who feel it's difficult to commit the time necessary for a much more modular approach. And that could be a stage of life issue as well. In your assessment, how do micro-credentials work as a selling point for lifelong learning?
I think it's a fantastic selling point because, first of all, there are so many learning opportunities in different contexts. And if we just create a system, of course, we need to have quality assurance that has been mentioned so many times today. But now I feel that in a way, even though everybody's talking about lifelong learning and continuous learning and stuff like that, it's just that we still seem to be in some sort of a gridlock of formal qualifications that we just can't get beyond that, even though everybody recognizes and understands that most of the learning happens somewhere else. So these micro-credentials, if they would be somehow recognized and made visible, it would be such an easy way for people to start, accumulating learning in small bite-sized pieces.
Okay. Thank you. There's a question for you from Sophie, for you, Annie. How do you see the link between ILA and validation? Should we make validation procedure itself eligible for ILA funding?
Yes, absolutely. It would benefit both the individual and the ILA system. So, I don't see any. It's like guidance should be a part of it. But of course, validation in a way is part of it, part of the whole guidance system, if you think in large terms, but yes.
Thank you. Dominique Delaporte has put some great questions. Maybe the team can pick out another one or two as well. And for Brigitte, thank you for your presentation. My question is how to validate skills for unregulated professions. Those economic sector is booming. Brigitte.
Unregulated profession?
Unregulated professions.
Well, I think there's not a problem. We have a problem for the validation of regulated professions.
Okay.
But the other ones, no problem.
Clear enough answer. Andre Frank, many of the ILA examples discussed relied on a user-friendly website. I think it's really important actually, a user-friendly website app to engage people, with many adults missing basic digital skills. Pedro, maybe you want to take this. Missing basic digital skills and lacking digital resources in the EU. How can we ensure that career guidance and the catalogue of courses which are offered to them reach them as well?
That's for me.
Yes.
So I think that the experience now during the pandemic has shown that many people had trouble in dealing with websites and with digital means. And although I think that you can create very clever digital services, they might not fit everyone. So the principle is that the service needs to adapt to the person's needs, and it's not the person that needs to adapt to the service. Let's put it this way. So you need to offer clever websites, but you also need to offer complementary distance support by phone, several different types of digital support, like was mentioned on the first half. So maybe you can have different solutions online for different people, and you need to have a way also to filter the type of users which are getting into these websites, so that you can adjust the type of support that you are providing. And also at the end, when the health conditions become a bit more normal, we cannot fully dispense with face-to-face services. It's also important to consider this when we're discussing.
Thank you. Annie, question for you from Bjorn Flintberg from the Research Institutes of Sweden. Maybe the team can scroll up a little bit, I can see the rest of this question. Annie, thank you. I think you're identifying the key to all this, so much occurring outside the formal education system, and the documentation of microcredits becoming so crucial. And I can't see the rest of that. So basically, there we go. So that we can track results and bridge the gap between formal training and informal learning. How do we do this? How do we bridge this gap?
Well, I was actually referring to the national qualifications framework systems. Like, for example, in Ireland, in the Netherlands, in Austria, just to mention a few, they have started opening up the NQFs to non-formal qualifications and non-formal learning. So if we just had some sort of a mechanism that quality assures non-formal learning providers and the courses that they provide, then that would be the bridge to the gap, really. Very simple. We already have the mechanisms, but we're not fully using them all over Europe in all the countries.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left. I want to get 30 seconds from each of you as well. Pedro, we'll start with you. You got to focus on one thing now in terms of building a way forward for adults for lifelong learning. What do you choose? What's your top priority in terms of what we discussed?
And from the perspective of guidance, it's precisely the statement that I made before. It's to make the development of career management skills part of the DNA of the ILAs. So because lifelong support, if that is the perspective, requires that people can manage their learning and that they can make efficient investments in investments which are meaningful for them. Otherwise, it fails. The scheme fails.
Okay.
It has. Okay, so I would say this is the main point.
Brigitte, 30 seconds. Your focal point. Where would you like to see the most emphasis put now?
Quality.
Okay.
Quality, because there might be many people who can be misleaded if they think that using the individual account, and I think that its quality goes with also guidance.
Okay, Annie, last word on this.
Validation. Well, not only like validation as it's carried out now, but it should be an integral part of the lifelong learning pathway. So it shouldn't be just one slam dunk in a way that usually it happens that validation, if it happens to you, it happens to you once in your lifetime, but it should be sort of more in different transitions of your career or your learning path. So, and it shouldn't be a massive process that would take you 2 years to carry out, but something lighter we should develop lighter systems.
Thank you so much. Brigitte, Annie, Pedro, thank you so much for excellent contributions today. Really appreciate your time and the value of what you've done. So thank you. Stay with us for the closing remarks as well. But before we get there, let's go to our overarching question. What are the most important enabling factors for the success of an ILA? What are the most important enabling factors? Again, these results, these comments have been comprised from what you sent in by our team here. And maybe this is more specialized. Since I'm an engineer, the factors are value for the individual and for the employer and for the professional organization. Can you tell how ILA can integrate with mandatory CPD, lifelong learning, of professional organizations such as engineers, doctors, nurses, etc. I would add lawyers in there too. Simplicity in the access to funded training, a good career advice system providing customized and adequate information according to the current and the future labour market needs and the training needs as well there, and guidance. I think that's a clear takeaway from today. Without guidance and guidance from an early position in life as well, we're going to miss out a lot in terms of developing our future economy. So thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to our audience for contributing so effectively on Slido. Like I said, all this is going to be compiled and assessed by the Commission as well, all your comments and your questions as well. There were a lot of things we weren't able to touch on today. I did read through some very insightful remarks, and to those of you who did that, thank you so much. And also, there was also a question, Antonina, I think it was, asked about the PowerPoints. Yes, the PowerPoints will be available shortly after the conference as well. I'm sure you'll be notified directly when that's possible as well. So you can look forward to that.